From the Arizona Daily Star and Tucson.com, this is the Wildcast.
Thanks for listening to another episode of the Wildcast podcast. Lots to discuss on the basketball front. I'm Justin Spears. We'll be joined by Arizona men's basketball beat writer Bruce Pascoe later in the podcast. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Wildcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and also download the Wildcaster app for free off the App Store and Google Play. And don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Wildcast. Like I said, wherever you listen to podcasts, we're on Apple, Spotify, so please comment and leave us a 5-star rating there. All right, so PJ. We got P.J. Brown, the Arizona women's basketball beat writer, joining us.
Hey, Justin, before we get started, I just have to give a big shout-out to my guy, Dave Rubio, on his retirement. After 31 years, he's stepping down as coach of UA volleyball. He's just a tremendous guy. He would always stop and talk to you, whether it was in the presser, in his office. If he ran into you at McHale, there were times, even during COVID, when he would be driving to San Diego with his family, and he'd hop on the phone with me to talk to me.
Yeah.
I learned a lot about the game and just a lot about life from Dave Rubio. He is one of the best coaches that I've ever covered.
31 years at the helm as Arizona's volleyball coach. He will retire, like I said, after 31 years, a lot of victories, a lot of incredible moments, produced Olympians, produced All-Americans, produced all-conference players. He was very successful at what he did. And it was always fascinating to me anytime I talked to Dave, because I felt like I learned something new about him every single time that I spoke to him, whether it was his ballroom dancing background, his love for surfing. The last time we actually had him on the radio show, I'm like, so Dave, season's over with. What are you doing now? And he's like, oh, I'm just going to, I don't know, probably go back to California and go surfing. And I'm like, surfing in January? Surfing in the winter months? And he's like, yeah, I just, you brave through it, and just it's my relaxing time. He finds surfing just so peaceful, and it's his escape from the world. And he's such a fascinating guy.
He is. It was always like, every once in a while he'd drop a little nugget like that where you just learn more about him or some fascinating thing. I remember I did a story about his mom being in an internment camp during World War II. And that was like, and he really never knew about it until like sometime during COVID. It all started coming out and everything. That was fascinating. He just was, he's one of those guys that you wish, you could write about him forever, because he always found time for you. He always was a straight shooter. He'd tell you exactly what's going on, good or bad, or even in between. He never shied away from anything. And I'm going to miss him.
Yeah, no doubt. So now that makes Dave Rubio he's no longer the longest tenured head coach in the Arizona athletic department. That now makes Fred Harvey.
Yes.
And then Laura Iannello, and then Jim Anderson, I believe. And then you look, up and down, you got John Court, gymnastics, and then, not Tommy Lloyd, it's like Jed Fish. He was at one point in time the new guy on the block, but now he's like a grizzled veteran, because you think about that year after Jed Fish was hired, we're talking about 6 or 7 new head coaches in the athletic department. So a lot of new faces, but some of these newer faces are now considered veterans.
Absolutely.
All right, well, let's talk about Arizona women's basketball. Big shout out to Dave Rubio once again for 31 years of excellence as Arizona's volleyball head coach. But now turning the page to Arizona women's basketball, PJ, tough stretch in the mountains. They had a chance to have a top 10 win over the Utah Utes, but they just came short. Paris Clark had a chance to be the hero in the end, but obviously it came up short. PJ, when you look back on Arizona and how they handled this road trip, this is a tough road trip, but how they looked on this road trip, where do they stand right now?
Well, that's an interesting thing. I wrote in my notes that came out Tuesday. I've been trying to wrap my head around this team for quite some time. Usually by this time of the season, you sort of know a team's identity, or at least they're sort of getting to that point. With this team, it's sort of all over the place. It's one time a lot of times they start out slow, and then they have to make a big comeback, like Oregon State and Colorado. And then at other times, they just go toe-to-toe with whoever they're playing against Oregon and Utah. They did that. So they're sort of all over the place, and that's just how it is right now. There's no like clear defined identity that this is the team that they are, right? That they're just this gritty team, or that they're just a dominating team, or whatever. They could stay this way. They could sort of figure it out and be more consistent. I don't know, but they do make it fun and exciting. I mean, in every game you're all of a sudden you're like, wow, they're coming back, or wow, they're playing great against a top 10 team. So there's no lack of excitement with this team at all. The good thing is, coming off of a game like Sunday, even though it was a loss and the way they lost at the end, to go to play a top 10 team like the way they did was pretty darn good. And I would imagine that there's a lot there that they can build on. And I think it could give them confidence going through for these next few games, maybe even through the rest of the season, that if they clean up a few things and if they start playing better defense, they could consistently win these games. They were right there.
But there's the good, then there's the bad, though. And
right.
Like we've seen Arizona's good, right? Last week they swept the Oregon schools, Oregon State, and Oregon number 17 in the country when they beat them.
Yeah.
So Oregon, they won 79-71. Great win under your resume. But then they go on the road, and Arizona on the road, and it's tough to win in the Pac-12, but they're 1-3 in Pac-12 play on the road. So what's not working when the team goes on the road?
I don't know. It's the big question, right? It's like with Colorado game, they didn't have the effort they needed to have. They didn't play good defense down the stretch. Frida Foreman hits a 3-pointer, and she's wide open in the last couple minutes. That doesn't help you.
Yeah.
And the other thing is fouls, right? They have foul trouble. Shayna Pellington, who rarely fouled out of 2 consecutive games, both at Colorado and at Utah, and at the point where they really need her on the floor. So that's tough, that all of a sudden then your starting point guard, who sort of has the presence to play in a 3-minute rally, and who last year came up with a couple game-winning shots, and she's taken off the court at that point. So they have to clean up the fouls. They have to be more disciplined and smarter about that, so that everybody who's supposed to be on the court at the end is on the court, because then that helps you. But the other thing is, look, Paris Clark comes in at Utah and she shows out. I mean, she had a tremendous stretch right there where she gets an offensive rebound, turns around, hits a basket, puts them 1 point down. Then she gets a tip on an inbound. Then in the second inbound, Esmeri gets the tip, and she gets the steal, and she scores a bucket, and they're up by 1. Yeah. So that allowed somebody else to come off the bench and do something great like that. That's the opportunity that's available when a starter fouls out. So, but really, it's the 2 things. Starters have to play smarter and more disciplined so they don't get in foul trouble, and that their defense has to tighten up. In Colorado, I mean, they were right there with a couple minutes left in the game.
Yeah.
Had their defense tightened up, they could have won that game.
This is going to be a very important 3-game stretch for Arizona moving forward. And by the way, they're now number 19 in the AP Top 25 after getting swept against the mountain schools. But the 3-game stretch coming up, you got ASU on Sunday at 3 o'clock in Tempe. That game's on Pac-12 Networks, by the way. And then a homestand against the Washington schools, which you think Arizona's going to be favored in both of those games. But then February hits. And this is where it gets interesting, PJ. UCLA, USC, followed by Stanford, Cal. Oh, by the way, the teams that just swept you, you got to face them at home. And then you end the regular season facing the Oregon schools on the road. That's going to be, like, the month of February, that's a gauntlet for Arizona women's basketball. But I guess kind of good news, bad news. Bad news, you got to face all these good teams. Good news, you're going to be battle-tested for the NCAA tournament, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, well, they started out in a gauntlet, and now they're going to the gauntlet. They've had one of the toughest league seasons or schedules than any other team in the league. I mean, they and US and ASU started out playing 5 games in the first 2 weeks, and then nobody else really played. Almost everybody else except the Oregon schools played only 1 game that second weekend.
Yeah.
And then you went into last weekend where they go to the mountain schools, and ASU has to forfeit both games. So both teams just prepared for Arizona last weekend. So that's really tough. They have that. And let's face it, every time out in the Pac-12 is a tough game, whether you're playing Washington or Cal or Stanford. It just doesn't matter. Stanford lost to USC on Sunday. I mean, you never would have expected that. Nobody would have bet on that, but that happened. That's a possibility in every game for the Pac-12 for the women. And so that's tough. The other thing is when you look at it from a NCAA seeding or selection committee standpoint, going on the road, playing the number 10 team in the country and almost knocking them off, that counts a lot more than being at home and playing a team that's not rated as high.
Yeah.
So all of this actually is good for the Wildcats and actually prepares them for this long stretch that's coming up. So from that standpoint, I think they're in a really good spot.
So Jay LaVille going to drop 40 this weekend against her former team?
We'll see. She dropped 10 in the fourth quarter and against Utah. So if her shot gets going, and she's playing in her own old home, anything could happen.
Yeah. She didn't make a three-pointer the last time Arizona played against ASU. I'm willing to bet she makes at least 4 in Tempe. Familiarity, very important here at Desert Financial Arena. Absolutely. All right, so Arizona versus ASU, rivalry week. Got Territorial Cup week here between the Wildcats and the Sun Devils. ASU, Arizona set for 3 o'clock in Tempe. If you can't make the trip up to Phoenix to watch the game, you can watch that game on Pac-12 Networks. PJ, of course, will be providing coverage. Make sure you follow her on Twitter and find all of her work on the Arizona women's basketball team at Tucson.com and the Wildcaster app. All right, now let's turn our attention over to Arizona men's basketball. And we got Arizona men's basketball insider Bruce Pascoe joining us here at the Arizona Daily Star office. So, Bruce, appreciate you hopping on the podcast after your travels. What did you make of Arizona's latest road swing? Because they had as you said in your game recap, kind of like a soul renewing win over Oregon State, and then they turn around and lose to the Oregon Ducks. So, what do you make of just kind of the wishy washy week for the Arizona Wildcats?
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe I and some others read into that too much on Thursday. They. I mean, I think they did get a little bit back, but then they ran into a buzzsaw in Oregon, which has all their guys back, and starting, at least in that game, was looking like the team that was supposed to finish second or third in the league. They just haven't been that team all season. So a little bit of it is on Arizona for being a little inconsistent, but I think Oregon's just a lot better. And obviously, we've seen this over and over in the Pac-12. A team that gets embarrassed on Thursday night is often a much different team on Saturday. And
they got embarrassed.
Yeah, and they got embarrassed by ASU. So they came back and made it pretty tough. And just it's a tough place to play. Arizona's always had trouble in Oregon, especially since even back to the McCourt days. But even in the new building, I think they're 1-6 or something. It's tough.
1-8.
1-8.
Yeah, since Matthew Knight Arena was built.
You wrote that, I believe. Yeah.
Well, first and foremost, in my 5 takeaways that I had on Tucson.com, I gave my first takeaway was a tip of the cap to Dana Altman for changing up the starting lineup after getting embarrassed, like you said, against ASU. So he put bigger guys in the lineup to match up with Azuolas Tubelis and Umar Ballo, and it proved to be the right move. And Philly Dante probably had his best game of the season against Arizona. And Nate Biddle, who was a former U of A target, didn't have an all-time game, but did enough to kind of have an impact. And it seemed like all the other guys that they shuffled in, it was just the right move by Dana Altman. I think he's got his lineup set now.
Yeah, I mean, I think Altman has proven over the years he's probably, if not the best, one of the best game day coaches in the league, and always has been, with the way he can move personalities in different positions in there and switch in defenses, and just the way he can tweak against you. And he maybe didn't do quite as many defensive switches, but he still threw out some zone and occasional press. And but more of what we saw really was just they just outplayed him.
Yeah.
And I'm looking at it now. I mean, I think the thing in this last weekend was probably a microcosm of it, but I think the thing that really strikes me is that Arizona is so much different in wins versus losses. It's really quite a spread. I mean, I think their average winning margin is almost 17 points. Their average losing margin is almost 16. I mean, it's
a lot of hot and cold.
Hot and cold, exactly. Yeah.
Yeah. Another takeaway, Bruce, and Arizona basketball fans, of course, after a loss, and when you have back-to-back weeks of losses, people start to say, well, what's the issue? Do things need to change here? And I looked at Kirk Kriisa and his shooting numbers ever since, I believe it was the Tennessee game, Bruce. And for some reason, he's much better on weekdays than he is weekends. I was looking at the weekday games, and he shoots 41% from the field, 44% from beyond the arc. On weekend games, he is 23% from the field and 20% from three-point range. So we talked about this hot and cold stretch for the Arizona Wildcats. Kirk Kriisa is a part of that. And sure, he leads the Pac-12 in assists, but Bruce, he's also had a lot of just sloppy, selfish, careless turnovers. And then you have a guy like Kylan Boswell who kind of benefited from it against Oregon and stepped in and probably had one of his best games as a Wildcat. A lot of people are like, well, should Tommy alter the lineup, and maybe it's Kylan Boswell time, and maybe Kirk Kriisa can come off the bench. I don't think Arizona is there just yet. Kirk Kriisa, once again, leads the Pac-12 in assists, but man, if it continues to go at this rate and Arizona can't find a way to sweep in the Pac-12, then maybe they do make some changes and bring somebody off the bench and put him in the starting lineup. I don't know if it's a Cedric Henderson, a Kylan Boswell, but it's not looking good for Arizona right now.
Yeah, I think there's a lot. I think really since the beginning of the season, maybe even before that, there's been. I mean, Kirk Kriisa is sort of a polarizing guy. If when people get upset about this team, they often go to him, and that's partly because of his personality. I think he's been a little inconsistent shooting, but again, looking at wins versus losses, Pelle Larsson's really been as much of a factor as anything. He's been really off in losses and good in wins. Kriisa does a lot of other things for this team. I think that's part of the reason Tommy Lloyd sticks with him. He brings them swagger, for better or worse, which he's kind of the only guy who's really kind of that way, I think, on this team. There's I think he likes having that aspect in it, and I think his assist to turnover ratio has suffered a little bit lately, but he's certainly had some maybe a careless turnovers. We saw that a little bit in the second half at Oregon State, and then on Saturday. Those are concerns, I think, for sure. But Boswell's also been a little inconsistent. He's been better, but he's still 17-year-old, still inconsistent. I don't think the answer, right now is to pop him in there instead of Crease. I do not see Tommy Lloyd doing that, but I do see Boswell playing more and more, maybe at the expense of Courtney Ramey's minutes. But, especially if he can handle it defensively. So, and I think next year, assuming Crease is back, which is never safe to assume that anybody's back these days, but next year you could see both those guys playing a lot together in the backcourt, maybe starting together, and maybe both of them are sort of the point guard in that sense too. They can have that kind of offense.
So, do you think Tommy would do that at some point this year, though? Maybe, hey, we're playing for the NCAA tournament this year, but maybe it could also give us kind of a launching pad for next year, because Courtney Ramey, his shooting numbers improved this week, but then he also kind of struggled defensively against Oregon. Yeah. So maybe does Tommy Lloyd, like you said, put Courtney Ramey coming off the bench and have Kerr, Crease, and Kylan as the starters?
I don't think so this year. I mean, it'd have to be pretty drastic. I think Tommy Lloyd likes sticking with the same lineup. He's done that unless we have an injury or some kind of issue down the road. But again, I can see, they start those two guys, and maybe the way it's going, maybe Boswell ends up with 25 minutes and Ramey has 20. And then as a lot of people say, it's who's in the game at the end, and that could be key too. If Ramey's not playing well on either end of the court, that could be an issue there.
Yeah. All right, Bruce. We're looking ahead to this week. You got USC on Thursday, UCLA on Saturday. College game day. Do you think if they beat Oregon, that college game day would be in Tucson this week?
Well, no, I was told before that game, actually, that they weren't going to. And
okay.
I'm not sure why. I wondered if maybe the tip time had something to do with it, because it is a noon tip, and that's a pretty quick turnaround to clean out McHale after having game day. But I don't know. I don't know the logistics there. But I do know they're bringing in, Jay Billis and Dan Schulman for Saturday's game, which is their sort of A crew or whatever. So I don't know why it's not going to be game day, but who knows? It's there. I don't know what the other the way they looked at it with the other matchups around the country. Honestly.
Okay.
But yeah, I didn't think it would be. You would have thought that for sure.
Yeah.
Especially with the game being I think on ABC at noon.
Yeah.
Seemed like a good fit.
Well, every time I think Arizona versus UCLA on ABC, I always think of the Salim Stoudemire game winner at the top of the key. Every time. But yeah, I mean, it would have been nice to see fans, like if they were going to the game, they could sit in their seats, watch college game day, and then they could turn around on the court and get ready for the game that way. They don't have to worry about cleaning out the arena for fans or something like that.
That would be really interesting, but typically game day is free. Like anybody can go.
Yeah,
so
that's true.
That's the problem. Would they restrict it to just ticket holders? And if they did, that might actually decrease the crowd for game day, because typically game day is mostly just college students who've been up since 4 a.m. having a good time. And, so I don't know. Maybe, who knows? That would be interesting to see that.
But the games itself, Bruce, very important, 2-game set for Arizona at home, because USC, they can match up well with Arizona's bigs. And then you got UCLA, who's probably the best team in the Pac-12 right now. I believe they're now number 5 in the AP Top 25. So you have a top 5 team coming in, a really good USC club. This is a chance for Tommy Lloyd and his team to once again put a couple of big wins under their belt. And that's the thing that's so kind of unique about this Arizona team, is that we talk about them struggling in Pac-12 play, but you look at their resume, they have some impressive wins. They beat Tennessee. I know Creighton's not ranked anymore, but at the time Creighton was number 10 in the country. San Diego State, like there are some really good wins under this team's belt, but man, they've had a lot of games slip through their fingers. This week they have a chance to really right their wrongs and get a couple of other big wins, but it's going to be more important because it's in Pac-12 play, and this could really boost Arizona in the conference standings as they try to make a push for a conference championship.
Yeah, I mean, you think traditionally you think about UCLA in this weekend, but USC is real.
They're good.
They're really good. And I think what happened with them is they lost to Florida Gulf Coast at home, the first game of the season, and then they just sort of got forgotten about. They didn't play anybody great. And then they had a couple of decent wins, I think, in the Bahamas, Tennessee, and Wisconsin, but they weren't really on the radar. And they're a pretty solid team all the way around. They've shifted more a little bit to guard play. Boogie Ellis and Drew Peterson are two of the best guards in the league. Whereas you think of SC with the Mobley brothers, and they've had so many good big men, for the last decade or so, really. But this year they've got a really good defensive player in Joshua Morgan in there, and then they've got the Vince Iwuchukwu back from his heart issue, and that's he hasn't been a big contributor yet, but you just wonder, that guy's got a heck of a lot of talent if he ever comes around. But yeah, in any case, this is an experienced veteran team. They're long. They can shoot pretty well. The interesting thing was both Peterson and Ellis were terrible from three in both games against Arizona last year. So they're going to be, wanting to turn that around. And also SC, frankly, was a little embarrassed on their home floor that last game last year. Arizona clinched the title on their floor at the Galen Center.
That's right.
I can't think that sits well with them.
Absolutely. And then I know. Saturday is a little bit ahead now, but UCLA is a big matchup too, and they have a big man who could go top 10 or even be a lottery pick in the NBA draft. What is his name? Adam Bono.
Adem, yeah.
Yeah, Adem Bono. Yeah, he's so good, and you of course Tiger Campbell at point guard. He's been there what feels like 10 years now at UCLA, and him and Kirk Kriisa. They've had some battles over the last couple of years. I mean, they have a good amount of respect for each other. There's a mutual respect between Tiger Campbell and Kirk Kriisa, but anytime these two guys get together, it's a dogfight between these two teams. And, of course, you talk about last year's results, Bruce, not sitting well with the other team. Well, UCLA, they're looking at, we lost to these guys in McHale Center. Oh, and by the way, we lost to them in the Pac-12 championship when we were up by 14 points. Right. We want to get back at these guys. So... in Arizona, they're going to be motivated because they want to come back after their Oregon game. But I'm worried that they're going to have all their energy for USC. They're going to have that soul-renewing win, like you said, against Oregon State. And then Saturday, they're going to come back and lay an egg against a really good team.
True, except UCLA has to go to ASU, which now all of a sudden may be the toughest game of the weekend for them. At least they could be looking at it that way.
True.
So, who knows? Maybe they put a lot into Thursday night at ASU, and that's a big defensive just slugfest up there or something like that, and they come down a little bit worn out, and then you got a noon tip. That's a quick turnaround for coming off a real tough Thursday game. So I think whatever happens, whoever has an easier time of it Thursday, is going to have a big advantage on Saturday, I would think.
Yeah.
But I think overall with UCLA, you look at them, they've got so many of the same pieces. Plus they added, Bona and Amari Bailey, just super talented freshman on the wing there as well. And the other thing about them is they're healthy and they don't have COVID this year. I mean, you think about UCLA last year, they actually went on COVID pauses left and right. They which was almost unusual last year, but they had stricter deals. They had to randomly test there. They didn't have to do that in a lot of their places. And and then they had, what was it? I think Johnny Zuzang fell off a skateboard and hurt his hip or something. I mean, stuff like that they were just snake bit last year. This year they're not, and it's made a huge difference.
Yeah. Well, it's going to be a battle this Saturday between Arizona and UCLA. Number 5 ranked Bruins coming in. That game is set for noon on Saturday, but big one on Thursday, Bruce. Arizona versus UCLA at 7 p.m. The Wildcats now number 11 in the AP Top 25. First time since November that Arizona's been ranked outside of the top 10. And Bruce, before we go, you look at the rankings, and Sean Miller's Xavier Musketeers are ranked number 8 now. They're ranked higher than Arizona. I never would have guessed that, but I guess it's a good situation for Sean Miller. He inherited a pretty good roster, and these are the type of players that play to his style.
Exactly. I mean, I think that's, he was a good fit there before. He may be maybe it's a good fit there again. He's really good with, veteran players who are tough. Maybe they're 3.5-star guys or whatever, and he can get the most out of them. He's proven that. I mean, he did that. He took a Xavier before the Elite Eight, which was, really, really significant. And I think too, this, just looking a little bit at this team he has there, a lot of juniors and seniors on that team. guys that are pretty good and very experienced and probably underachieved the last couple of years. And I think for whatever reason, I think they just bought into this staff, and it's really clicked. And I think they're getting better and better as the season goes on. And Miller had years like that here with some of the teams that you didn't think were going to be that good. The biggest one being 10-11. You think of it that year, but there were some others like that where they definitely overachieved, and and then there were some tougher years too. But again, it is kind of interesting to see that success right away. But it's not completely surprising when you consider his track record and the fact that it is a veteran team.
Those are you described it perfectly. The Sean Miller guys, they're 3.5-star guys.
Yeah,
they're good players, but under-recruited. They don't have the star rankings to go along with it. They're going to be there for a few years, and they're tough players.
Yeah, tough, and I think I'm guessing just looking at it on the outside, they're just totally buying into it. I think part of the problem Miller had here is he had 5-star players a lot of times, and sometimes they bought in, but sometimes they didn't. And sometimes, I can remember there were times when you've seen it. We talked about this, like, guys would stare at each other after the inbound, like, why didn't I get the ball? Stuff like that. I mean, that my guess is that stuff's not happening with Xavier right now.
I saw Alonzo Trier chuck up a baseline jumper, completely clank it off the back of the iron, and then Raleigh Alkins run down the court rolling his eyes like, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Saw a lot of that in the later years of the Sean Miller era. But good for Sean Miller for getting the Xavier Musketeers up to number 8 in the AP Top 25. But the Wildcats, they got a challenge ahead. The LA schools going to be a tough bout. And then they got to go on the road and face the Washington schools after that. But USC on Thursday at 7 p.m., UCLA, now number 5 in the top 25, at noon on Saturday. You can find all of our work on Arizona Wildcats basketball on Tucson.com and the Wildcaster app. And as always, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review the Wildcast podcast. Bruce Pascoe, P.J. Brown, appreciate you guys for stopping by in studio. Thank you once again all for listening.